Chapter 15. Control. Ryan desperately tried to regain his composure before his mask was removed. He was struggling to breathe, and the inside of his mask was dank with condensation from his breath and blood he had coughed up. He still had his face paint, he reminded himself reassuringly. Very few people outside of the crew would be able to identify him. Most people who survived encounters with him knew his distinctively deep voice better than his face. He made a mental note not to say anything or make any noise that might let him be identified. He sure as hell wasn't confessing anything. Sounded like the crew was banking on the idea that Shadles wouldn't kill him until there was no doubt to the world that he was in fact the vagabond. Ryan wasn't so sure, but he knew it was pretty much his only option. Stay in control. He coughed again, and more blood filled his mouth, but this time he held it there, the familiar metallic taste washing over his tongue. "You saw it here first," Shadles said without flourish as he tugged at the top of the mask. The blood inside the mask smeared across Ryan's face, streaking the face paint with red. Dark bruises were already beginning to form on his face from Zatora's beatings. Ryan's long, dirty blonde hair was disheveled and stuck out at odd angles. His eyes burned with intensity as he glared up at his captor. Shadles' lips twitched into that smile, and Ryan couldn't help himself. He spat the blood with all the force he could muster, landing straight in the smiling bastard's eye. The smile dissolved into malice as Shadles briefly lost himself to anger and punched Ryan hard in the face, connecting with the bridge of his nose, his head snapping back and his eyes tearing up instantly. Ryan wanted so badly to laugh, to show that it meant nothing to him, but his laugh was too distinct. He didn't dare try it, settling for a smug smirk instead. Shadles pulled a handkerchief from his vest pocket because, of course, he had a handkerchief in his vest pocket, and dabbed at the blood in his eye. "Make sure you get a close-up of his face," Shadles murmured to the camera crew, scanning over the comments as he continued to clean himself up. He scoffed quietly. "Seems they're not very impressed, although there are a lot of amused comments about your choice of face paint." He looked back to the comments. "His hair?" Shadles laughed again, more in earnest this time, clearly now directly responding to the comments as they came up. "He's been hiding that mop under the mask." He continued to read as he removed his jacket, draped it neatly over the table, and carefully rolled up his sleeves to his elbows. Ryan was thankful for the brief distraction as he averted his gaze from the camera lens as best he could and focused on getting enough air into his lungs. Shadles, either responding to prompts from the commenters or simply having grown tired of them, returned his attention to Ryan. "So, vagabond, the audience wants a confession. Gonna give it to them?" Ryan sneered at him, blood now trickling from his nose, making him look deranged. "No? All right. Here's the deal." Shadles was addressing the camera as much as he was speaking to Ryan. "I'm going to kill you, with or without a confession. If you confess, it will be quick. If you don't, well, I guess we'll see just how long you last." Without his mask, Ryan's peripherals were improved, and out of the corner of his eye, he could see Zatora's eyes briefly widen at the threat. "That's interesting." For a split second, the thought entered his mind that perhaps Shadles was bluffing about killing him, but it barely had a chance to properly form before he felt the cold steel press against his throat. The sharp edge of the blade of Ryan's own, previously confiscated, hunting knife scratched against his skin as he breathed, afraid to swallow. Shadles' grin was back as he withdrew the knife from his throat and ran it down Ryan's left arm, tracing a line from his elbow to his armpit, leaving a shallow cut through his skin and finally slicing through the sleeve of his washed-out black t-shirt. Ryan barely reacted, having actually not felt the cut of the knife in his nerve-damaged arm, but looked to see the blood beading along the wound and soaking into his shirt. Shadles used the tip of the knife to pull the fabric of his t-shirt away and sliced cleanly through it, from the neck to the hem, then through the other sleeve so that the fabric completely fell away. Ryan sighed. There goes another good shirt. His body was covered in red welts and bruises, overlaying older, silvery scars. With a deft flick of the wrist, Shadles ensured there would be at least a few new ones joining the collection after today. If he survived long enough for them to heal anyway. He started with small, shallow cuts on Ryan's torso, dragging the knife slowly through his skin, letting it catch and tear in places, gently twisting it in others to ensure the wound wouldn't heal cleanly. Ryan grimaced through the pain, which was mostly just annoying and stinging, especially in comparison to the branding. He'd been with Jack when he got tattooed once before, and he'd described it as feeling slicey. Ryan wondered if this was anything close to that. Soon he was covered in his own blood, and the stinging sensation was starting to creep into his consciousness, competing with his other pains for attention. The burn at his neck, numbness in his arms, the ache in his shoulders, the dull throbbing pain from the beatings, the sharp stabbing pain of broken ribs, and his now constantly cramping legs and feet provided a veritable symphony of discomfort. Shadles leaned in close and lowered his voice so only Ryan could hear. I thought your crew would have turned up sooner. Looks like you've actually been abandoned this time, Ryan. The use of his name so bluntly impacted him more than any of the blows he'd taken, and he physically recoiled. His reaction wasn't lost on Shadles, who pulled away, eyeing the camera again and stepping aside to allow them to capture his handiwork. It's quite a drop from the top, vagabond. How are you feeling down there? Ryan caught sight of himself in the monitor. It didn't look good. He was covered in bruises, open wounds of varying lengths and depths, blood trails punctuating the contours of his body, making him look pale and gaunt in contrast. He'd looked bad before, but he usually kept his wounds covered under his jacket, hidden from his enemies and the crew alike, so as to not show weakness or garner pity. The crew would be watching, or maybe not. Maybe Jeff had forbidden them, leaving him to his fate. Maybe it was Jeff logged into his account, creating plausible deniability for when they found a replacement. Abandoning him, just another sacrifice for the good of the crew. At least he wouldn't be their downfall. Looks like you actually been abandoned this time, Ryan. Shadles' words were played in his head. I thought your crew would have turned up sooner. One way or another, it will be you who unmakes your crew. He was expecting them. Ryan's head snapped up, eyes wide but determined. Shadles still had the knife in hand and his head cocked to one side as if trying to decide the placement for his next cut. As he stepped forward, Ryan put all his weight into his arms, drew his knees up to his chest, and kicked out hard. His heels impacted Shadles' chest, knocking the wind out of him and throwing him off balance, stumbling backwards and coughing. It's a trap! Ryan shouted, looking directly at the camera and swinging his legs back down, desperately trying to find his footing before Shadles picked himself up. The force of the swing caused the hoist to sway, and suddenly Ryan's arms came crashing down in front of him, the movement sending waves of pain shooting through his shoulders, and before he could react, he was on the floor in a heap. Shadles was now up, fuming with rage, the knife still in his hand. Ryan willed his legs to work under him, awkwardly springing to his feet, nearly losing his balance again when his left foot seized with cramps. He lunged forward, making for the door, but he wasn't quick enough as Shadles charged him, tackling him to the ground. Ryan landed flat on his back, Shadles hovering over him. Ryan's hands were still bound together, but he managed to swing his arms at Shadles' head, the heel of his left hand impacting his jaw and snapping his head sideways. Shadles was quick. Ryan supposed it helped that he hadn't been restrained, branded, and beaten for hours. Before he knew it, Shadles was back on his feet, and his steel-toed boot connected with Ryan's ear, and the world exploded again. His vision wavered, and all sound was consumed by high-pitched ringing. Shadles was on top of him now, his knees pressing into Ryan's arms, his breath hot on his face. He couldn't hear what he was saying. The knife at his throat again. He could feel the skin break under the pressure of the contact, and he could only hope it would be quick. At least I sharpened my knife. The feed went black. Gavin made a strangled noise as he saw it cut out on his screen. "Guys!" Jeremy called the crew back. "What happened?" Jeff wailed, voice cracking. "Where'd the stream go?" "I don't know, Jeff. Ryan said it was a trap and made for a break for it. Then the feed cut out. I don't know what happened." Jeremy paused, swallowing. "The other guy was fast, and he had a knife, and I don't know if Ryan made it." Jesus Christ. Jack pulled anxiously at his beard. The crew were silent, save for the tapping of keys as Gavin kept working on finding where they were keeping Ryan. An alert tone made them all jump. It was a message sent to Ryan's account from Shadles. "You have 3 hours to decide how much of the vagabond you get back."